You're listening to Sharing Life. Hello and welcome. This is our inaugural podcast for Sharing Life. This is the podcast for the movement of the Holy Family School of Faith. I'm Troy Hinkel, co-founder, vice president of the School of Faith. I'll be your host. And tonight, for our inaugural podcast, I'm pleased to be joined with our newest member of the Holy Family School of Faith team, Nicholas Hinkel. Nicholas, you want to say something?
Well, I am the son of the co-founder of the Holy Family School of Faith.
I wonder if they could have figured that one out.
My primary job right now is I'm a missionary down at UMKC in Rockhurst at the JP2 Commons. I'm happy to be here. The coronavirus has prevented anyone better from being able to be interviewed, so I guess it's just me.
Well, sometimes that's true, and sometimes it helps being the son of one of the co-founders, but be that as it may, Nick, thanks for joining me. So, Nicholas, I know you've got big plans coming up on June 6th. That is not just D-Day, that is also a day you're planning on getting married. So would you share with our audience a little bit some of the conversation we had today about just your thoughts about trying to plan a marriage in the time of the only pandemic I've ever lived through?
The only one me either. I mean, it's just been it's been crazy for me having to try and figure out how. We just sent out invitations and we're realizing we don't know if we should have waited, if people will be too scared and just RSVP that they won't come. If you're listening to this and you are planning on coming, well, then would love to have you. If not, still send gifts. No, just kidding. That was something that we talked about, myself and my fiance, Francine, about that it's going to be tough to be able to try and adjust to see if people are coming, if the venue will still have us, if the caterer is still on. So definitely a lot of things we don't know at this moment, but I guess we just have to trust that it's in God's hands.
Right. Well, I think this is the hard thing with this current pandemic that we're facing, so-called, is one, you have the danger of the virus itself, particularly for those who are over the age of 60 and those who have compromised immune systems. Then there's the concern of a spike that could overwhelm our hospital system the way it did in Italy. Then there's the economic impact. And even with School of Faith, all of our live formation classes, a lot of the discipleship offerings that we had, a lot of our missions like yours down to the college students at University of Missouri, Kansas City, these things have all been canceled and are postponed, including our formation sessions with the school teachers. So it's a challenge. And I wanted to talk to you tonight, Nick, about this challenge because I want to ask the question. All we're hearing are the negatives about the coronavirus, and you shared your own concerns, and I know lots of people have those similar concerns, maybe not about marriages, but certainly about long-term planning. So I want to ask the question, are there positives to be gained at times like this, and if so, what? What are your thoughts? Positives to be gained?
Well, the most immediate one that I can think of, as we were talking about earlier, that the fact that all those kids were out and about in our neighborhood biking with their parents and things like that. Granted, if one of them is sick, I hope they don't get the others sick. That could be something that quickly stops if they start passing it on to each other. But it's probably the first time I've seen so many people out in our neighborhood, all the kids, all their parents, all out, I'm sure that their jobs are canceled or they are staying home to help with their kids. But the one positive that I can see coming from this is just the fact that we're coming face to face with the most important things in life, and that is the safety of our families, the safety of our children, and realizing that, that our other things that we fill our time with, when they're canceled, when they don't work out, what we're left with is the most important things.
Yeah, I think that's really true. My take on it is exactly that I think the things we place our confidence in whether it's finances or our job or our health or groceries of certain kinds or
Right.
sports or entertainment or recreation. These things overnight have been shut down, or education.
Right.
And it forces us to ask ourselves, what really are our priorities and what should our priorities be? I felt the same way being outside earlier today here in Kansas City. It was in the 60s today, a little bit rainy in the morning, but still a very nice day. And so much jovial activity outside. And I thought, this is very strange. On the one hand, there's a great deal of panic. On the other hand, in our neighborhood, it sounded like people were at Disneyland.
Yeah.
I agree with you, Nick. I think that's an interesting take of yours, that we're seeing more family togetherness based on things being shut down. And it just made me wonder, maybe this is part of God's plan to show us who's in charge and what our priorities should be. What do you think?
I mean, as a caveat, I would say, we don't know if this experience is universal. Maybe some families are all locked themselves in their own rooms and playing games and
Yeah, but even if they were doing that, if the families were playing games together.
Well, if they're playing games together, I guess I meant like we usually do. I'm in my room playing, but if all I'm just trying to say though is that the family could be playing games together, probably being forced to come in contact with each other more often since they're all home from school and whatnot. But I just think that our experience here is a positive turnout. It's perhaps not going to be the universal for everyone in the United States, but we can certainly see that here in our neighborhood, it seems to have had a positive impact. And I want to go back to something you said with sports being canceled. I think, they take up so much of a lot of people's times, like Charlie, my little brother, your son, who was just distraught after finding that all the major sports had been canceled, that I think he really, he's been playing out with his friends a lot more. He's been, I've talked to him more, just he's not checking ESPN as often because there's not too much happening.
Right.
I agree with what you said, that it has kind of reduced us to what we can do with each other rather than just consuming the forms of entertainment that have been shut down. Granted,
right,
there are some that haven't, but that I think it has, from what I can see, has had a positive impact on the neighborhood kids, on our family.
and on their families and on our family. Yeah, it makes me think that God is wanting to remind us of what's truly essential.
Right.
And I want to say it's faith and it's family and it's authentic relationships. And yet let's talk about the faith aspect for a moment. Here in Kansas City, we're on the Kansas side, but on the Missouri side, it's the same. All the masses have been canceled. Now, I get the reason. We need to do social distancing according to the experts. And yet it seems to me at times like this is where we want to draw near to the Eucharist. But it seems to me also that there's something positive that could be drawn from that. What are your thoughts on these cancellations of the masses and the impact it could have on our faith negatively versus the impact that it could have on our faith positively?
I mean, I know that when I was because we went to Mass a few times when they had told people that their obligations had been lifted and not many people were coming, and I remember remarking to you and to my brother that it must be making Jesus' heart so sad to have so many people not there. But then as I thought about it, I mean, I'm sure that there were some who myself partially included, to be completely fair, who thought, okay, well, I guess now I have more time that Mass, has been canceled, that there'll be no public masses. But that as I thought about it, the more I thought about it, the more I thought, that this is a good opportunity for me to examine my own desire to come to the Eucharist. Is it something that I am desiring? Is it just something I'm kind of, enjoying being, released from the obligation, or is it a real desire in my heart to grow closer to Him? But yeah, I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the old saying, absence makes the heart grow fonder. For those who are prepared, meaning somewhere deep inside, they may have lost perspective with giving priority to sports or money and finance and the stock market, or to any other thing a little too much, but yet deep inside they still had a desire for God. They just had struggled giving a right order to their commitments. Now they have an opportunity. This has been done for them. And now that we are not able to attend Mass, we just came back this evening from going to confession at our parish, and there's not supposed to be more than 50 people there, but there certainly were more than 20 that were waiting in line. And people that were drawn to the sacrament, because that's the sacrament that's available, and people who are coming in there to pray before the Blessed Sacrament, maybe sitting separated from other people. But that warmed my heart because I saw people, some of whom I hadn't seen before, ever. And I know lots of faces for what I do for School of Faith in this archdiocese, and having been a member of that parish for quite some time, there are people I have never seen before who were there. And I thought, okay, maybe this is the silver lining, that we've already mentioned how taking away these other commitments have forced children and parents to focus on each other, at least in our neighborhood. And now perhaps we're seeing with some, they're recognizing it's time to be with God. I've got nothing else to do. It's time for me to listen to Him and to listen to what He's saying. I think this is a key thing that we need to emphasize, that a purification, and I really believe that's what we're faced with. This is a purification, comes from God, and this is a good thing. Purifications are always a good thing, because they come from Him to draw us closer to Himself.
Right.
And for sure, this is a facet of this pandemic that's available to us, albeit I don't hear many people talking about it.
Yeah. I mean, Israel wandering for 40 days in the desert, that was certainly, they had to rely on God 100% for food, water. That was a purification process for them. And there are many, many more others in Scripture of people going and being purified by enduring some sort of hardship, some sort of trial. Yeah.
Right. Isn't it interesting that this happened during Lent? I was thinking about this earlier. Last year, do you remember what happened Monday of Holy Week?
I do not, no.
That was when Notre Dame caught fire. It was Monday of Holy Week last year. And what happened? Do you remember when that happened? Do you remember what the result was of the French people?
I mean, they all banded together, started pledging a bunch of money to rebuild it.
Right. They got, what was that, 24 million or something like that in just a matter of hours. But I'm also thinking of the young people who came out to pray the rosary while Notre Dame was burning. It was so emotional. I had to give a class the very next day. I could hardly get through the lesson because I was overwhelmed with emotion. I've had the good fortune to have been in Notre Dame Cathedral multiple times, multiple occasions. And it really is a beautiful church, one of the most prestigious churches dedicated to Our Lady. And that catching fire during Monday of Holy Week, I thought was very spiritually significant, because these things are always symbolic of the intention-getting devices the Lord will use. This is very biblical. He oftentimes uses numbers and days of the week and seasons of the year, and persons, places, things, and events to point to other truer events that He's preparing Israel for or preparing us for. And now this year we have this virus that's hitting during Lent. So, Nick, tell me more. What do you think? So one thing you mentioned is the purification that comes from suffering. Mm-hmm. Why is that purifying? And why could that be a spiritual meaning, something we could perceive deeper in this crisis, versus just passing it off as just simply one of those things that happens and it's nothing more than that?
Right, yeah. I mean, thinking back in my own life, the times when I've really struggled are the times also when I've really grown. That it's hard to kind of put things into perspective if you're doing well, if things are going off, everything's hunky-dory. It's hard to really make sure that and gut check yourself that you're going well, that you're making sure to put the right things in their proper perspectives. And I think that that's a problem of humanity, that we strive so hard, rightly so, to overcome some of the problems. I'm here thinking of the problems such as starvation, or even like ice being on the roads, that maybe 50, 60 years ago, if there were a really hard ice storm, everything would be canceled, similar to this. And yet now we've been able to kind of erase that, make sure that doesn't happen, make sure that people can get to their jobs, get to wherever they want to go. But now that this coronavirus is hitting, people are unable to do so. And we've been unable to overcome this obstacle through our own technology. And I think that is a way that God is reminding us, no, there are still some things that you can't come over, that your job is not to make yourself so completely able to overcome anything, like super people. I guess right. I'm straying though from your question originally.
Well, but you're saying two things. One, I asked you about suffering, and you were pointing out how it certainly strips away our distractions so we can properly prioritize, for sure. But then you were mentioning how, in this case, it's pointing out our fixation on efficiency, how we like to overcome things, and now we can't.
Right.
And so the suffering is purifying us of that fixation. So you weren't straying too much. I agree. I think also suffering, it purifies our love, because it's one thing to be in a relationship with another when it feels good, when I'm the one receiving the benefit. In this case, a good feeling, pleasure, something warm and fuzzy. When I have to go out of myself and actually suffer, experience inconvenience, contradiction, even pain, and I do it anyway out of concern for the other, that is purifying. And I think that's why St. Maximilian Kolbe called suffering the food of love. And so as we're experiencing forms of suffering, granted, they could be worse. I'm glad it's not like the plague or the Spanish influenza or these kinds of things.
No one's dying.
But it is an opportunity for us to wake up a little bit and say, you know what? We don't have things under control so well after all. But I know who does, and he loves me. And if I spend time listening to him, maybe I'll discover that. Suffering certainly can achieve that benefit. So I agree with what you're saying.
What examples in your life would you say that you have of times when you suffered and maybe didn't realize that it was God purifying you?
Oh, wow. Good question. I've been fortunate in that I've been healthy most of my life. I think the suffering that we endured, because you're too little to remember this, but I've always worked for the Catholic Church, and Mom stayed home to take care of you and your 5 other brothers and sisters. we for years and years and years struggled financially, and that was such a crucible, because working for the church, and the more years I had committed to that career endeavor, the less prepared I was to do anything else.
Right.
And there came a point in time when all your siblings were born, when your brother Charlie was a baby, that we were at such a loss at what to do financially that we thought, I'm stuck. And I remember thinking, Lord, you tricked me. I think of that, is that from Jeremiah?
You duped me, Lord.
Yeah, you duped me. I trusted you. I decided to work for your church. I decided to move away from family and friends. Your mom and I, as you know, grew up in Colorado. We've lived in Kansas City, or the Kansas area anyway, since 1999. And with this distance, it wasn't so easy for us to receive the kind of help and support. And I was so angry so many times because we couldn't pay our bills. And yet, how many times God came through miraculously. We'll save some of those stories at a later time to help us financially. But I also remember discovering through this travail that his supportive, providential hand was with us. It happened in a time of prayer when I remember asking him, Lord, why is your help always just a Band-Aid solution? Because I felt like maybe this month to get through with our bills, maybe a parent was sending us $25 or $50 or whatever, and that was enough to pay the minimum payment on the credit card or, the minimum payment on some other bill that was due, but that was just simply getting us by for that month. It wasn't taking care of the bill itself. And I thought, Lord, why this Band-Aid solution? I mean, anybody could offer me that. When are we going to be totally out of this situation? And I realized the Band-Aid solution was the solution because he was showing me that he gave me what I needed. And that's all we needed at that moment. Yeah. We didn't need more than that. We never missed a meal. We never bounced a check. And then when the time was over, in 2008, right when the market was starting to crash, surprisingly for us, the opposite happened. Debt was wiped out. We sold our house in Lawrence, which was 40 miles away from us. It's where the University of Kansas is. And I worked there at the St. Lawrence Center for some time before moving here to the burbs of Kansas City and get School of Faith rolling. And all of a sudden, all of our debt was taken care of. It just happened in a snap of a finger, which showed me he was capable of doing that all along,
right?
But he wanted us to experience the travail, the strain, the experience of our own finitude, our own lack of sufficiency, so that we would depend and rely more on him.
Yeah.
What about you? Do you have any, in your young years, any such examples?
Well, the problem was that I was, during that time, eating so much food that that's what puts you into debt, I think. So I was okay during that time.
Yeah, no argument here.
No, but I think that in my young life, I've been very, very blessed. But one thing that I can think of is just a time in my life, this is just before high school, that I was just going through. Some of the friends that I'd had stopped hanging out with me for one reason or another. And I really look back on that time of my life. I was lonely. I thought that I wasn't really worth much. And then going to high school, meeting new people, and people telling me that I'm funny. I realized I'd inherited your sense of humor. I mean, I guess maybe I already knew. But no, people came out, I made friends, and people would come up to me and tell me, that was a funny thing that you said, whatever. And I guess I realized that I appreciated that, and I really appreciated other people, other friends, and because I'd gone through that time in my life when I didn't really have any friends. And so I found myself being able to be friends with people who maybe were less socially accepted by a lot of people, and people who were the jocks and popular kids, just because I appreciated the fact that they took an interest in me and tried to take an interest in them, because I knew what it felt like to be alone. So
right, yeah, learning how to appeal to all men and hopefully save a few, as St. Paul says.
Yeah.
Well, I want to sum up what we've said so far, because I want to finish by looking at some advice that you can help me offer our audience here on how to move forward in this. But to sum up, we're looking at this situation differently. Rather than looking at it as a crisis, we're looking at it as an opportunity. We've mentioned that it's a way to reprioritize, to detach from our own false sense of self-sufficiency and efficiency. Sometimes that can be a fixation for us. To rather reattach to God, to be able to listen to him through our suffering and through the distractions that have been removed, to spend more time with family, to recognize the purification that comes through such suffering and how it not only helps us prioritize but strengthens our love, and how it draws us closer to God and closer to these relationships that really matter. So let's close with some advice. What advice, Nick, would you give to people moving forward so they're listening to this podcast? It's changing their life. Their total perspective has been opened to a new avenue of living. What advice for these folks could we give at this point?
Well, I imagine, some people might come back and watch this after the coronavirus thing has cleared up, or maybe the world ends after the coronavirus, in which case it doesn't matter. No, but I mean, I guess advice that for people, through this is similar to what I've already said. Reflect on the fact in all of the trials that God sends you that you are dependent on Him. That as much as we can try and overcome the limits placed on us, I liked how you put it earlier, that our trials remind us of our own finitude, the fact that we are finite, we are limited, we are not able to overcome every single obstacle, nor are we meant to. That's
a good thing to learn,
right? And that's God didn't create us to become gods like Zeus and things like that. Jesus shows us that Jesus took on a lot of limits. He came in a particular place at a particular time and took on a particular task. That these are things He didn't do everything. He only did a few things. He limited Himself, and so to remember that all of the trials that God sends us are ways that He is attempting to remind us of that finitude, of the fact that we're not all powerful. But and in that it's not just a slap in the face to try and make you humble. It's a time I can think of the times when I was maybe doing something wrong and I was punished by you.
Yes, that did happen. That happened a lot.
All right, I had a temper, but that I guess maybe my temper is a good example of that.
Yeah, you get that from your mom.
Well, that was I was only able to overcome that by frequently being reminded that was something that was detrimental to me, and sometimes I would require more forceful being sent to timeout to realize that it was an time in my life when I was struggling with something, but that the bad things that were put in place, or bad things quote unquote, because they ended up helping me, me not being able to play with my toys or my Legos or whatever, was taken from me to remind me that these good things are only given to me if I myself am able to use them correctly.
Yeah, to respond well. That's beautiful, beautiful thoughts. I think our Heavenly Father is indeed that. He's a Heavenly Father who wants to give us good things, provided that we use them well. Mm-hmm. And if we're not using them well, He might have to bring a little parental reminder. Right. I also want to offer this traditional practice that we have forgotten about as Catholics, called spiritual communion, only because communion the last 100 years has become so much more frequent. We can receive daily at communion if we wish, as I do wish, and so I will be definitely missing that. But we can make what's called spiritual communion, and I encourage our audience to begin doing that every day, to ask our Lord to come into your heart, that you wish to be in communion with Him, that you can apologize and make amends and repent for the times that maybe we've taken Him for granted. We haven't adored Him and loved Him and received Him with the devotion that perhaps we should have, with the frequency that perhaps we should have. And if there were times we received Him unworthily, these are times for us to offer up penitentially, so that His grace through our offerings can repair that damage. The other thing I want to say is we should make time every day, now that we have time cleared off for those of us who are working from home, to pray. Spend time every day to pray. And here I want to plug our rosary that you can access through dailyrosary.com, or our YouTube webpage. If you just go to Holy Family School of Faith on YouTube for our our YouTube channel, not webpage, our YouTube channel. Or you can also go on our webpage at schooloffaith.com. So 3 ways you can access our rosary: dailyrosary.net, or go on schooloffaith.com, or go to the Holy Family School of Faith YouTube channel, where Mike offers the rosary live currently at 7:30 p.m. Last night was our first one of that. And have time of prayer. But I also encourage our audience to spend time in spiritual reading, where we read the Gospels or the Psalms or some book that's written for meditation, like a book called Divine Intimacy or In Conversation with God, or some of these books, the books of Father Jacques Philippe. Take these books and spend time reading them slowly, pausing on them and spending time meditating, reflecting on these passages. This is the kind of prayer that God is pleased with. This is the kind of prayer that helps heal, perfect, and elevate our soul, so that our spiritual life doesn't become such a drudgery, but actually becomes joyful. So let's make time for Him. Let's recognize that this is not a crisis, but rather an opportunity, so we can reprioritize, strengthen our love for God and family, and spend more time with Him in prayer by rosaries and spiritual communions. Thank you for listening. I look forward to having you join us again next time. Until then, may God bless you and have a blessed day.